This is BookSwell Intersections. I'm Cody Sisco, and I'm here with Shonda Buchanan.
Hi, Cody.
Shonda, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
We are in the fabulous World Stage. We're on the stage at World Stage.
We're technically on the stage at the World Stage. This stage was the stage from the old World Stage, and this is the new World Stage. So yes.
And I assume you've been on this stage before.
I have been on this stage many times. My daughter has been on this stage when she was 3, actually. It's funny. She was probably one of the first World Stage babies. And after maybe a year or two of hearing all of us read, she was like, I want to read a poem. And so she got up and she read this poem. The people who could fly, the people who could fly, they came to the house and I said, this ain't no begging house. And so everybody in the audience just laughed. And I'm like, is that what I said? Did you hear me say that to somebody? So yeah,
that's amazing.
This is definitely a family place.
Right, with a long and storied history.
Oh my gosh. Literally, people have met here and then they've had their children and the children have come back. And, so it's integral in the community, in the South LA, South Central community. My gosh, Kamau Daoud and Billy Higgins are the founders of the World Stage. And Kamau Daoud is an award-winning, lauded, poet who, wanted to create a place for poets to read their work in an authentic way. And Billy Higgins was a friend of his, one of the most recorded jazz drummers in history, and he's since passed many years ago. But what they created became a place where we literally deposited our tears. So people would come and musicians would come, poets, fiction writers, people just from the, off the street and just come and they can feel the love, they can feel the authenticity and that people were doing work. We were doing the work,
And right next door is Esowan Books.
Yes, Esowan Books. And they're actually a transplant too. Esowan, I was talking to James. James is one of the owners, James and Tom. And I was talking to him last month and he said, no, remember? Because I said, oh yeah, you guys were over on La Brea. He said, no, but remember we had that little cart, because they started with a cart. And then they were on Crenshaw above, not the barbecue place, but one of the places. So, and Muhammad Ali came there, it was just like, because it was still, even though it was small, important.
Yeah.
And now they're in Leimert Park, which they should have been here always.
Right.
They should have been here. It's because this is the village.
This is a locus of so much artistic energy.
It really is. It really is. Yeah. So I'm lucky to have, my daughter was raised in Esowan Books. And she was also raised here. So it's like having like two of the parents, the parental figures, here. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And I remember coming across your anthology, The Voices of Leimert Park.
Yes. That was a labor of love. That was 4 years of collecting poetry, literally, because, we didn't have an anthology for this area. We didn't have an anthology, to my understanding, of African-American poets. So I think there was a trust, kind of issue. They were like, what are you going to do with it? So I was literally asking people that I knew. I'm like, I want this poem. Can you send me this poem? And I need this. And then I moved to Virginia. Oh, yeah. So it was like, but you're not here. I'm like, I'm still working on the book. And it was published in 2006, and it became a seminal book for African-American, Los Angeles poets. And people actually use it to teach. Professors are using it in San Francisco, and Vona professors are using it to look at kind of the experience of African-Americans in Los Angeles. Gosh, we, and I say African-American, and then we had a couple of Latina poets as well. One guy was from Belize. We had an Ethiopian poet in there as well. But like literally there wasn't a place when the Voices from Leimert Park came out, we didn't have a book. And I'm thinking, I just want to make sure that I'm not ignoring anyone that did something, but we didn't have a book like that. So when we did the Redux, we published the next one, the new one in 2017? I think it was 2017. Yeah, it was August 2017. And that was our 10-year kind of reunion book, but so many different voices in it. We wanted to still reflect Leimert Park. Yes. But so there are it's gentrification, there are different poets who come here. People are not afraid to come to this area anymore. So we have white poets in it, I have a Japanese poet, who's in there, but it's still people who are important to this area, people who are Leimert Park affiliated or Leimert Park entrenched, poets who've come to the world stage, who become a part of that, the fabric or the tapestry, that we create.
And you've created a space on the page for them that, it gives their work a lift.
Yeah, it did, I think. And maybe half of the poets in the book, in that anthology, the first one, 2006, now have their own books.
Yeah.
And I'm not attributing this. Peter Harris would say, don't take credit for that. I had books before that anthology, but
it's an important step to be published, right?
Exactly. So they can point to that and say, I was published in this one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the 2017 one got a great review. And I'm blanking on the name of the gentleman, a Los Angeles book reviewer. And he gave us a fantastic review just in terms of the different voices, So yeah, I was very blessed to kind of be one of the conduits. And I have to say, Elias Wandimu is the person who published the first one. And this is like at the beginning of Tsehai Press. Mm-hmm. And then Tsehai Press took off. It became LMU. It was entrenched at LMU. And it's now in the Marymount Institute at LMU. He's published many, many books dealing with Ethiopian culture. But when he and I had lunch a couple of years ago, and I said to him, the 10-year anniversary is coming up, we should do another anthology. And we were just, eating a little bit more. And I said, you should just give me my own imprint. And so we were talking and I said, yeah, you should do that. And then I think maybe, I don't know, a month later, he can attest to this, but a month later he said, I do you have any names? And I gave him some names and he didn't like my names. I was like tip of the spear, Wanda Coleman, just kind of giving her credit. And I said, something like, I can't remember. And he said, no, he said, Harriet Tubman Press. We should do Harriet Tubman Press. And I was like, I like that. And then I thought, Harriet, is that okay? Are we going to do the good work? And so it just kind of snowballed from there. We had a huge opening, just kind of launching Harriet Tubman Press. Angela Rye came. A Congresswoman, Barbara Lee, was there.
Okay, yeah. She was my Congresswoman for a while.
Oh, yeah. Right. And I really love her, the work that she does as we are, as politicians do. But so the community came, they showed out. It was packed. We did it at the Vision Theater. So, I think if we're looking at the steps, the ascension, I think that's the word that I want to use, right?
Yeah, I love that.
The ascension of the Black voice. I do think that the first anthology was a really important part of that, because there are and were so many people who were kind of trying to do that, like the Watts Writers Workshop, after the Watts riots in 65. And that's where Kamau Daoud came from. And then he took that energy and he and Billy Higgins started the World Stage. And then Michael Datcher came, and Michael Datcher founded or created the Anansi Writers Workshop. Mm-hmm. He was like, we're going to do it like this, very orderly, very structured. And then, we'll have open mic and you can do whatever you want. 2 poems or 5 minutes, or you get called off the stage.
Yeah.
So this is an important space, really important space. Yeah.
And does the Community Literature Initiative work out of here, or does that?
That's what Hiram is doing right now. So
sort of mentoring and providing a space for writers to work on their craft to get ready for the stage.
So it's interesting when so in terms of community lit, you definitely would have to ask Hiram about that. I think that that's his baby. So I don't really know.
We'll have to have him on the podcast.
I was going to say have him on the podcast and ask him to come down. But I know he was instrumental in the press. He and Connie Williams, instrumental in publishing The Poets Who Come Here. And just saying, we can do this ourselves. We don't have to wait for validation. We don't have to wait for someone. It's like, we've got technology, we've got the know-how, let's do it. We've got the spirit, the energy, and let's do it. And gosh, I don't even know how many. We can yell upstairs and ask them how many, books they've published so far. But they have done an important act, I guess, important act in bringing our voices forward, in a way, and celebrating ourselves, in a way that we didn't feel we were celebrated,
Yeah, and we can do this ourselves.
We can do this ourselves. Yeah, just with your anthology too, you guys did the LA writers, right?
Yeah, the Made in LA anthologies.
Made in LA, yeah. So you did the second one.
Second one just came out about a week and a half ago, so that's exciting, yeah.
So I should review that.
We'll have time to talk about that later. But I want to talk about Black Indian, which is forthcoming. And I see that you're holding in your hand a book of poetry, Who's Afraid of Black Indians. Maybe my first question is, what's the relationship between those two? And what were your motivations to move from this book, which is published, to this next book, which is coming out soon?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my motivation for writing Who's Afraid of Black Indians, the book of poetry, I've always been writing family poetry. I've always been researching my family history. And I went to a powwow in Virginia, and I'd been dancing at powwows. I'm a women's traditional dancer. So I've been dancing at powwows for now 12 years. But then maybe 10 years, I guess I'd been dancing. So I went to a powwow in Virginia, the Chickahominy powwow. And usually when we go to that powwow, there was no issue with being Black Indian, with someone who looks visibly Black like me. And I have to also say, I'll backtrack for a moment. I also sang on 5 American Indian drums. So my drum would go there, and we would actually sing. So they were familiar with me, like the Chickahominy tribal people, knew who I was, and many people knew who I was, particularly because of my locks. So that day that we went, I wasn't singing on the drum. I was with friends. I was with people who were on the drum. A Cheyenne woman who's a good friend of mine, who's one of the singers, and a couple of other people. So this was an anniversary for the founding of Jamestown, and there were a lot of official people there, kind of celebrating their Indian, their tolerance is the wrong word, but the culture and tradition of Indian culture still being there. So the tribal people said you have to have your tribal enrollment card to dance. And many people do this. Many American Indian tribes do this. But that tribe had never done that to me. So I went out and danced in the circle. And after I came out of the circle, a couple of people came up to me. Maybe they were the tribal members, chiefs, head people. And they came and they said, hey, do you have your card? And I said, no, I don't have my card, but I've danced here before. And they were like, well, please, we just only want people with their cards to dance. And I was like, wow. So I felt away because they looked just like me. They looked like my cousins, And
previously, all arms together.
Exactly. And so when we did, they called for intertribal. And when you call for intertribal, anyone can go out. You don't have to have regalia on. White people can go out. No, people who are new to the powwow can go dance. So I was like, okay, it's intertribal. I can go back, I can go dance. So when I came out of the circle, there were 3 or 4 of the, I'm blanking on the word. Why am I blanking on the word? But committee members of the tribe, I guess I'll say that, waiting for me. And they were like, we told you not to dance. And I was like, what? And so but when I was dancing, I felt everybody staring at me anyway. And I said to my Cheyenne friend who was dancing next to me, I was like, this is how wars get started, And she was like, what are you talking about? I was like, just wait, It was like, because I can feel it. And when I came out, they were arguing with me. And I was like, wait a minute, I know your history too. Like, didn't you send away for full-blood Indians, on to the plains, for some Seminole to come back and kind of increase your blood lineage because of the, Indian wars had depleted your tribal men. And so I was like, wait a minute, I know your history. Like, you're not full blood either. You just have recognition. So I was like, you made me write, and I said, I'm going to compile this book of poetry that deals with the intersections of African Americans and American Indians through my family's eyes. And so I have a poem that talks about my family migrating from North Carolina and kind of fighting with the Tuscarora in the Indian Wars. That's the first poem in the book. And then moving from North Carolina into Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, and then finally Michigan, where I was born. Because as we have been on the trail, we've been on the trail a long time, but we've lost things. Mm-hmm. We've lost language. We've lost our actual, like the tribe, the cousins, I've had to regain everything. And in my research, when I found locations where my people were, I would go to the powwows and I would like, hey, I'm Manuel, and they were like, oh, there's some Manuels here. They're in our tribe. And I said, okay, hey, I'm Staffers. And they were like, oh, we don't have any Staffers here, but you can ask those people. Mm. So it's all been a bit about reclamation. But at the same time, I said, I want to give it this title, Who's Afraid of Black Indians, to hearken to Virginia Woolf's, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, because her book was about identity and femininity and, womanhood and as a writer. And for me, my book is definitely about Black Indian identity, mixed blood as well. And heritage, culture, and tradition, just kind of reclaiming that.
One of the things I took away from your memoir was in the historical records that you go through and your portrayal of the construction of whiteness as a way to lump together American Indians, Black people, and sort of erase the individual richness of their traditions and their genealogies and people. And it seems that you also talk about the tribal card as a construction of a type of identity that is a way of doing similar things.
Right. It's a fabrication. The enrollment card is something that the government constructed so they can be identified and counted. So they can count the 5 civilized tribes on the Trail of Tears, and then those people would be the only people who could get allotment. Anyone who they physically moved into Indian territory on those reservations, those were the people who could get government funding and government money, but then everybody else couldn't. So anyone who didn't get on that trail, anyone who didn't end up in Indian territory, who was not in a federally or state recognized tribe, even if you were mixed blood, even if they were your cousins and you got off that trail and you left the reservation before that, you couldn't claim the tribe. But the really interesting thing that Walter Plecker did, the first magistrate of Virginia, was he instituted the Racial Integrity Act. And so the Racial Integrity Act essentially, and he was a white supremacist, a known white supremacist. So the Racial Integrity Act essentially said there are only white people, and then everyone else in America, you're colored. So can you imagine for 10 years or 20 years, if you're colored, and if you're colored, you can be other. And if you're other, then you don't have a tribe. You don't have tribal grounds or homeland. And if you don't have that, then they could take it. It's like, oh, you're from the what nation? Because that's not on our logistics. Like that's not on our legislature, exactly. So it's erasure.
Erasure and theft.
Erasure,
hand in hand.
Theft, which is the precursor for eugenics, and just, sterilizing people if they're not white, so.
Yeah. And removal of children from their
oh my gosh.
Parents,
That's a whole nother, the Carlisle School, even Hampton University, where I worked for 13 years, actually. Hampton University is a land grant school, which was founded by General Armstrong at the time, for free slaves, after emancipation. And so General Armstrong's upbringing was in Hawaii. So he brought his missionary experience to Hampton University, which was Hampton Institute at the time, Hampton Institute and Agricultural something or other. So the freed slaves were there first. There were American Indians there, but there wasn't an actual program. And then the government turned to Armstrong, to Hampton University and other land grant schools and said, can we bring some Indians to you? And American Indians, what do they call at the time? Whatever they called them at the time, but no, American Indians to you. So his policy was kill the Indian, save the man. This is like literally.
Right.
this is in the books, you know.
Which is a very missionary kind of
very missionary,
approach.
or kill the slave mentality, or kill the black man, but he can be a worker. Don't kill the worker, but just that mentality, or the slave mentality, So for what was it, 23? No, night was 1868 to 1923. I think I'm getting the beginning number wrong, but there was an Indian program there, and people were so American Indians were sending their kids to the school because they wanted enculturation and assimilation. They wanted their students to bring back the knowledge. And then there were some who took their kids and just said, hey, you know what, we're going to educate the savages and civilize them, and then we'll give them back to you. But the reservations were not a place that you could flourish if you had an education. So even today, I think there are, I do ceremony on a couple of reservations. So Fort Belknap is in Montana, is a place where I go. They do have a school. They do have people who are educated, who give back to the tribe in many, many ways, teachers and health workers and, that kind of a thing. But at the same time, you can still see the poverty, on not just that reservation, but many other reservations across our country. And I have to say that, American Indian women are the most murdered women in our country, most raped and abused women in our country. The gang violence, the suicide rate on reservations is heartbreaking. Actually, it's still heartbreaking. So it's interesting when you say, what was the motivation for writing this book, and then how does it connect to my memoir, Black Indian? I see the rupture of erasure. Like I see what we suffered, even though we laughed loud and, we loved each other, in really good ways, but there was also kind of an enactment of that rupture and an enactment of the erasure. So we're just like literally, even as we see physically, like we're lighter, we're mixed. What we used to say, some of us had that good Indian hair, quote unquote, but still there's like, the history is like pushing itself out of our pores, in ways that manifested in addiction and abuse, and just identity crisis, for many of us. And that's what I write about in the book. I got a couple of reviews, and Ford's review books gave me a review. Kirkus, reviewed it. And it's so interesting to see people talking about it. And I know they say, you can't have a thin skin when you read the book reviews. But what they're saying is provocative and, what did he say? Unvarnished. And then someone else said the effects of poverty, because we were poor, we were poor growing up. But this is what the effects of poverty, has done. But I also want to make sure that in the writing of the book, they see how my family has struggled to thrive with what mixed bloods were given.
It seems to me that there's a sort of multi-generational transmission of trauma and abuse that gets enacted, and part of the as I followed your grandparents and then your parents and then your own journey, it seems that there's a sort of a movement towards how can we be whole, how can we heal, how can we move past this, what we've inherited.
No, definitely. I think I always say the blood doesn't lie, and I think in terms of the trying to move past it, you really can't move past it until you identify it and name it, And that's in any 12-step program, it's like, so maybe mixed bloods need our own 12-step program, and, just to, kind of, reclaim ourselves in that way that makes us whole.
And that's part of why you started to uncover the family history. Yeah,
no, it's definitely a reason that I wanted to uncover the family history. In fact, when I was 17, that's a journal entry, and I still have that. It was, it was a list of things I wanted to do before I died, at 17. Why? Precocious. But it was like, okay, I want to discover my American Indian roots. I want to know, where we came from. So that's always been this lifelong goal for me. And I think I wrote I wrote the book because multiple things happened in our family, like a succession of things. Like I would go back home in the summer, and before I left, I would say, okay, nobody die, like nobody die. And they're like, shut up, girl, shut up, kid. Because I'm always like, don't do this, don't do that. But it was like a succession of things just kind of happening. And we were like, God, do you see this? Mm-hmm. Or do you see us? So I wanted the book to be a kind of prayer. I wanted it to be a testament. I wanted it to be a thing that that provided us with where we came from, and then where we were going, or where we could go, if we. And again, I have to say it's my book, so I can't speak for anyone else in my family. Mm-hmm. But if we could just kind of recognize what we had, what we were walking with, like what the past, had given us, what we actually had inherited. Mm-hmm. But I think honestly, time has been the thing that has given us our peace. Did we find ourselves? I don't know. I know things now that I didn't know when I was 17. Right. I know so many things about my family. I uncovered a lot of secrets that I needed to know in order for me to become a better woman, a better friend, a better mother. Mm-hmm.
There's a tension in the book between you wanting to know and understand and come to terms with everything, and the very real motivation to leave stuff in the past, to not talk about it, to not revisit pain that is too traumatic. And I wonder if how you feel as a writer, your need to write it out as compared to non-writers.
Yeah. So how I feel as a writer is, so who says it? I want to say Annie Dillard. She's one of the things that she says is, write hard. And I wrote hard because that was the way that I could understand things. I think I could say it like that. That was the best way that I can make sense of it, because I had a record. I could see it. It wasn't just a thing that I would talk about to friends or, bring up at parties, or we would only talk about at family reunions. Right. It was like, no, here's a book like, I don't want to say like the Bible, because all the Christians will be mad at me. My dad was a Baptist preacher. But here is a book that you can go back to, and it has a record of the things that happen. And someone told me that I have a memory like an elephant. I don't think I have a memory like an elephant. I have a memory that serves me in making sure that I'm safe, mm-hmm. and making sure that there's some kind of growth there. And then also for my daughter, like, sweetie, this is what happened. Even if you didn't hear it from everybody else, like, mm-hmm. this is what happened in our family. And here's something that you can give to your people, and it will not be lost again. It will not be lost again. So as a writer, it was a thing I had to do. It was a thing I had to do. Mm-hmm. And I've got 2 more memoirs, it's like, so that was and I realized that's my mom's. This is a book for my mom and my aunts. Mm-hmm. This is a book for me to see how I became the person that I became. The next memoir is actually about ceremony. Mm-hmm. And it really is about the things, the way that I came back into the fold of tradition and culture on both that African and that American Indian side. Mm. I have to say too, and the white, the white side too, because I literally don't remember anyone that I was related to who was white coming to the family reunions. Like, I don't remember that. My grandfather had married 2 white women, but he didn't have children. My mother was already born, so he didn't have children with her. So I was like literally trying to go back, and I'm like, so was that person only half black and half white, or was there some Indian in them? And so what about Uncle Jack, and what about this person and that person? So I made my mom do her DNA test, because I did my DNA test particularly because I didn't want any reporter to, say, hey, she didn't do her DNA test. She doesn't have any Indian blood in her. And I've got my 0.02%. So if I've traced my generations, my ancestors back 13 generations, I can see how the blood goes like that, and it's like, okay, so now that person married this person and that person married this person, and your father is mostly African. So this is where your 40% comes from, which is where my 40% African, West African, Sub-Saharan African comes from. But when they said 7 generations back, my DNA test, 23andMe, you have a full-blood American Indian ancestor, I could point exactly to that person.
And you'll be able to identify who that was and
who those people were 7 generations back. And I said, those are my full blood. I knew those people. But when my DNA test said you have a full-blooded Ashkenazi Jewish ancestor, I was like, what? So I'm really a Jewish princess too? Like, who are you? So I could celebrate, but I don't know those people. You know what I mean? So in terms of the identity creation, it's always been Black Indian for me.
When you came to LA, was there any period of culture shock coming from Kalamazoo to Los Angeles?
So when you said Kalamazoo, I was thinking it's all in your language. It's all in your words, like Kalamazoo. Yes, Kalamazoo, the word means Ki Kalamazoo, which is a Anishinaabe word meaning hand mirror. But because of the lakes, the Great Lakes. So yes, because Kalamazoo is country. And Mattawan and all those little surrounding townships, they were farmer territory and settlements, that kind of a thing. So coming to LA for me was overwhelming. And I used to talk like this, and I didn't know that I used to talk like this, and I would say things real slow. And I didn't know that until someone recorded me when I first came to the world stage. And I was like, who is that person? Because I learned to I became an Angelino. I learned, I acclimated to where I lived. But I didn't like LA the first year I got here because it was too big. I couldn't feel my bones. I couldn't feel myself. And but I was definitely writing about the ocean, which was different for me because we had lakes, freshwater, Great Lakes. And I was writing about the mountains and the Mulholland Drive. Like I used to drive Mulholland Drive when I first came in Sepulveda. Like I would go from one end of Sepulveda down at Slauson all the way like as far as I could go downtown, because it was like different terrain and territory for me. And then, then I started liking it after the second year. And then I started seeing, so this is how my brain works. It's like, it's LA, but why are people in pockets? Why are there, why are African Americans, Black folks in the projects and Watts, but then also there's this affluent Black area, up in Fairfax, area. And then why are all the Hispanics over in Boyle Heights? And then, and then the white people get West LA. And then, so I started looking at the different factions, and I was like, I'm going to be in all these communities. I don't have to choose one. And literally I met a guy, who was a Crip. And when I first got here, I guess I was 19, maybe. That was a year after I got here. And I was just talking to him about like how beautiful the ocean was. And he was like, I've never been to the ocean. I'm like, what? I was like, so of course I took him to the ocean. I was like, how could you never do? He was like, because I don't have a reason to. Because he was living in Watts, surviving, gangbanging. And he when he first saw me, he was like, you're not from here, are you? And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm not from here. But at the same time, it's my home now. It really is the place where I recharge, where I come back. I mean, my friends and my family are here. My friends who are my family now are here.
You described it in the book as a place of safety. Yes. And that every trip back home was one of danger or of having to face violence in some form or another. And they, sometimes you were like, I'm never coming back. I'm going to LA and I'm not coming back to Kalamazoo.
I wrote that.
To paraphrase. Or maybe actually.
She's so spoiled.
Really.
Well, but I understand. I mean, you talked about the life that you'd built here for your daughter and how you wanted her to be safe. Yes. So that's an understandable impulse.
Yeah. You know that joke, there's a Chris Rock joke. Chris Rock has a joke, which is not a joke, but it's a joke. He says, you're not supposed to leave your daughter with Uncle Leroy because you know how Uncle Leroy is. Do you know that joke, that Chris Rock joke? Basically, he's talking about how Uncle Leroy is a molester, a child molester.
Which doesn't sound funny.
It is not funny. And so, but Black people are laughing because we all have, or maybe everybody has it, but just, since he's telling that joke to a, predominantly Black community, we're laughing. So that's what it was like. It was like, I will not leave my child with anyone who I suspect or think. And I literally would tell people, like, if this happens, I'm coming after you. If this happens, I know where you live. Do not hurt my child. Yeah. Do not hurt my child. I've done so much work, to make sure she's safe. Do not hurt this child. V. Kali, one of my friends, has a line in her poem that says, do not fold, spindle, or mutilate. Do not fold, spindle, or mutilate this child. And that's how I felt. Yeah. And I wanted her protected in a way that I didn't feel I was protected. With a step uncle, molesting, me in a car, in a way that, and everybody was around too. And suddenly it's like, but no one else saw. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah. And you internalize that as a kid. You're like, what happened? What did I do? And then I blocked it out. For years, I blocked it out. And then, I don't know, maybe it was 18, 19, 20 or something like that. It came back. And I was like, what? That happened? And I didn't even realize that many people have a trauma like that, that they block out.
Mm-hmm. Our brains are good at putting up walls around things that we don't want to deal with.
Yeah. Our brains could just compartmentalize it for safety. Yeah. You will survive here. And when you can deal with that, I'll give it back to you. Mm. Yeah. So
I want to ask you about the Sweat Lodge. Yeah. And on a personal level, I'm very interested in what that experience is.
I can take you to a Sweat Lodge. If you want to go, there's a really great Sweat Lodge in Sylmar.
Yeah. I mean, you describe it as this hard experience. And I think, there are a few places where we find ourselves alone, confronting ourselves. Meditation at its base is push everything away, exist in your oneness with everything, but lose the identity. Is that the same?
Meditation is, it's hard because of the singular space you're supposed to sit in. It's hard because you're supposed to focus on a higher mind, or you're not even supposed to focus. You're not even supposed to be there. That's what meditation is. A Sweat Lodge is meditation, meditation as if you feel like you're dying. So you go into a Sweat Lodge and you are coming with the intention to pray or to release something, but you are also sitting there and you're sweating, and there's the door. So let me explain it in a way. So people are sitting on the ground, and the only door is what we call a door is a flap. And once that flap is closed, it's dark inside. And then the sweat leader pours water on the rocks, and then it's not just about, it's not a sauna. You are there to do work on yourself. Mm. And so you can say it's meditation, but you are actively participating in a thing to clean your mind, your body, your soul. Many people do this for recovery, recovering alcoholics, or people who have addiction, or people who've lived hard lives, people who basically are not whole, in themselves, and it's just unbalanced. Mm. And so when you come to a lodge, you bring these things. Sweat leaders do it differently. Sometimes they will let you say the prayer. They'll let you say it out loud, depending on when it's time. Other times they'll say, everybody prays at once, and you pray. But the thing is that it's this communal experience, where their prayer becomes your prayer. Mm. And that no matter what their color is, or no matter what their, how they were brought up in religion, they still are a human being in this place. And we always say, we are so grateful that the medicine survived, and that these ways survived, because it was outlawed until, my gosh, when was it, 1970, something like that? American Indians couldn't practice their indigenous culture. Yeah. I think 78 here in California, if I'm not mistaken, please forgive me, Eddie, if you're listening to this, because Eddie is one of our sweat leaders, our lodge keeper in Silmar. But he used to say how his people would have to hide, up in the mountains and do their ceremony, and do these ways. So we're grateful that we still have it. There's a scene in a movie that I love. Val Kilmer is Thunderheart. It's called Thunderheart, and there are some men who are in a sweat lodge, but when they come out of the sweat lodge, they're getting arrested. Can you imagine getting arrested, leaving a church or a synagogue or a mosque? So it's like, so for the indigenous people of this land to have to hide that practice because it was power for them. It was a way to deal with everything, that had happened, 400 years of fighting and then losing the war, and losing it. So the sweat lodge is a way to reclaim that, to acknowledge our ancestors, all of our relations, we say, all our relations, meaning no matter where you come from. And for me, as I'm saying all my relations, I'm thinking that those Africans, I'm thinking of the what says in my DNA, the British, Irish, folks. My last name is Buchanan, so I'm like, where are those Scots? I don't know you, but who are you? So that's a way that a really important, way for me to get well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, to get well.
Could you share one of your poems with us?
Absolutely. So I'll share the poem.
1 second.
Oh, sure. Okay. So this is a poem. I don't read this one often, but I'm going to read it today. It's a poem about one of my predecessors. I found on the Roberts side of my family, my earliest ancestor, her name was Mary Roberts. Do I have it in here? Mary Roberts. And she was an indentured white woman who had married a black man, an African, and they had kids. So I'm writing about the Roberts, and it's called Part Wolf. The year is 1765. The township, Northampton County, North Carolina. The farmer, James Roberts, grandson of Mary Roberts, a mulatto of some prestige, able to, when she died, leave her sons 250 acres of fertile Meherrin, Ginkaskin, Tuscarora land. They were free people of color then. In 1724, born free or bought themselves out. But somebody said, gotta keep count of them. The year is 1790. 25 years later, the very first census taker comes to James's hay-speckled homestead. He white and official. He got unopened leather-bound ledger and a slim quill in hand. Legal words emerged from his mouth. What do you possess here? James says, about 400 acres of land roundabouts. Water? No, thank you. Census taker scribbles. Animals. About 100 cows, a steer, 15 horses, 15 chickens, 2 goats, 5 mules, James say. Again, census taker. How many you got in this home? James say, 6 of us. Census maker shifts, cross leg. What kind? What kind? James shifts, squints. Sir, we human. Maybe a drop of wolf. He laugh a little. Census maker, man, look up, say, what kind? What kind? What kind? James take off hat, lick lips. Negro, white, Indian from these parts. My father, John, a mulatto, that's black and white. My mother, Cherokee, and I think my wife, Negro and Indian. Census maker look up and down the farmer's lean brown face. Tell them to come here. Here. He smiles without smiling. James motions to the woods. Kids, wife, show yourselves. Census maker, look at wife's Anne's smooth black braid. Look at the kids, skin like wet copper pennies in a mouth. I see. Census maker writes numbers in a box with their faces on them. Others, slaves, free. James sees that nowhere is there a box for the animals, the land. That must be on another page. Wow. So that's what they were dealing with, you know. They had to pay. If you were a free person of color who married an Indian, you had to pay tithing on. You had to pay tax on that on that family member, on your wife. If you were a white man, actually, it was outlawed. You weren't supposed to. But if you were a white man who married a black woman or an indigenous woman, you could be fined, and that woman could go to jail. Or depending on the county, you would still have to pay tax on her. So, I mean, it's unfathomable to me, you know, that's what people dealt with until 1967, when the Lovings, you know, took it to court. You know, Mildred and what is her husband's name? The white man and Mildred, who was actually Black and Rappahannock. A lot of people don't know that she was Black Indian. So yeah, and she has a son who actually said that their mother never claimed Black. She only claimed Indian. But our society said she was colored. She was Black.
So much has changed, and yet so much remains to be changed.
Yes, absolutely, definitely.
Shonda, thank you so much for joining me today.
Cody, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
And I hope we get to talk again.
I hope so too.